In-depth journalism in the Memphis community, the Daily Memphian is of Memphis, not just in Memphis, and seeks to tell the stories of this city. TheDailyMemphian.com. Truth in place.
I'm Bill Dries with the Daily Memphian. We are joined by Shane Shapiro, the founder of a company called Sound Diplomacy, which is a consulting firm that works with cities on music as a part of public policy and as part of a city's development. This is on the record. We record this September 19th, 2023. Shane is here for several reasons. First, he has a book out this month titled This Must Be the Place: How Music Can Make Your City Better. He will be here in Memphis as part of a book tour on October 2nd. The Memphis date is at the Green Room at Crosstown Arts. And as we reported last week, the Memphis City Council has put up $150,000 to match $150,000 raised by the Greater Memphis Chamber for Sound Diplomacy to look specifically at our city's considerable music scene. Shane, let's go back just a step here and start with what it is Sound Diplomacy focuses on beyond the shorthand of public policy that involves music, the business of music.
Yeah, well, our job is to really understand the economic and social impact that music has in a community and its relation to everything else. So music is something I think, well, especially in Memphis, I think everyone values and everyone understands its value, but there actually isn't any verifiable data or very little verifiable data around how much it's worth, where it is, how it fits together, what the deficiencies are, what the strengths are, how it relates to the local regulatory infrastructure, the investments that are being made in the city, social cohesion, and so on. So our work will be a data and evidence gathering exercise to answer all those questions. Mm-hmm. So it just provides a robust evidence base for the city to make decisions, based on evidence rather than based on sometimes emotion or feeling, which is how music tends to, be governed, because it's something that produces emotion and feeling. It's something that's important to all of us. So that's the work that we're going to be doing. We've done in over 100 cities around the world, quite a few in the US, but it's an incredible privilege to be doing it in Memphis.
I take it you will make recommendations at the end of your work here. What will those recommendations cover in general, and who do you address those recommendations to?
Yes, of course. So the study will be kind of 5 parts, and I'll say so. There'll be an economic impact assessment. There'll be a map, a literal map online of what we call the music ecosystem, and that will include things from music teachers, choirs, straight through to venues, festivals, music businesses, an assessment of the city's regulatory and policy infrastructure, and then quite a lot of talking to people to figure out, that's really how you understand it. We're no experts in Memphis, obviously. We're just trying to gather data and evidence in a way that we believe works, and then total that, the recommendations are usually based on key themes around workforce development, incentives, business planning, that kind of stuff, tourism, community development around how investments are made and to whom and why, as well as obviously industry and audience development, and licensing and regulation. Mm-hmm. And sometimes a mixture of all of them. Every city is a bit different, but really, this is about how to turn Memphis, let me rephrase, how Memphis can continually evolve into, a city that is the future of the music industry as much as it represents, the past and present of the music industry.
Right.
And I think that the incredible talent that Memphis has, especially in hip hop music and other and genres aligned with hip hop, as well as obviously other genres, I think maybe recognized culturally, but could use a little bit more in-depth evidence-based analysis and policy recommendations to ensure that Memphis is set up to welcome, to incubate, and to thrive as a music business city.
Right. And especially in hip hop, so much of it is get something out there. Oh, you just had something out there. Now you need something to follow it up with. And it moves very fast. And it's hard to figure out, especially for someone who's just coming into the business, to figure out what is the process for all of this? How can I get involved in this and be able to do this for a living? You know?
Yeah, yeah, and most importantly, it's to explain the economy that exists in this genre and the vast, expansive, lucrative economy in hip hop, but in music in general. And sometimes the policies, and this is not intentional often, and this isn't down to any individual. It's just a lot of times, communities over time have built in policies that are more either restrictive to music or sometimes just ignore it as a business. Mm-hmm. And the more you talk about something, the more relevant it is. And we always say, a city, if a policy doesn't exist, then it doesn't exist. So if a city doesn't have a music policy, then it can't communicate in a data and evidence-based way about what music needs, what music could benefit from, what music, requires, and so on. So building this music policy for Memphis, which will be on top of the incredible work in tourism or the work that Music Export Memphis does and other organizations, and will help to, I believe, turn music into a pretty significant workforce development driver, not just to attract more musicians, but to attract more workers. Mm-hmm. I know that, St. Jude's is hiring thousands of people in the next few years, and I know FedEx is expanding, and these people, people want to come and live in a place with culture and with a good quality of life, and music is a part of that. And I do think that Memphis can continue to develop its toolbox in terms of how it uses music to attract, high skilled, educated workers in the future.
Mm-hmm. So Memphis, as we've talked, is a city with a considerable music heritage, but it's not really considered a music industry town, especially when you compare it with Nashville just to our east. Can that change? Should that change? I mean, we have to have some remnants of a music industry just, in order for shows to get done here today. So how does Memphis not become like Nashville? Because you know what the rivalry is like between the two cities in that regard. But do we need to become more attuned to maybe a recognizing that there is a music industry here and that it can be built out?
Yeah, well, I don't think, obviously, there is no need for Memphis to be like anything other than Memphis. And I get the competition. Every city that we work in competes with another city. It's the same everywhere in that sense. I think that the recognition of music as a business is one thing, but the building in of education and understanding how music literally works, how the business functions, what is the business made of, and it differs depending on genre and sector and so on. It can be quite complicated because it's not a point of sale business. You're not selling one specific thing for one specific purpose. You're selling a thing that could be many things for many people. It's that education that creates more deliberate and intentional policy. And this is where I think Memphis can improve, is being more deliberate and intentional about how it treats music as an economic development tool, rather than just treating music as a cultural or tourism development tool. I'm not saying don't do that. Do that. It should be economic, cultural, and tourism. Mm-hmm. I think Nashville and other cities have put more emphasis into understanding the policies and frameworks and practices that music needs to thrive. Where Memphis has been very kind of a little bit less hands-on in that respect. And I think now is the time, especially Memphis is doing incredibly well in hip hop, for example. I know we've talked about that, but not just in hip hop, in alternative and in Southern rock, obviously blues and jazz. But I think that and also it's a city that's kind of big enough for people to care, but small enough to get things done. And those kind of mid-level cities where also the the cost of living. I know it's going up everywhere, but it is still cheaper to live in Memphis than in other cities that Memphis is competing with. Austin, for example, or maybe Nashville. So there's a lot of things pointing in the right direction. And it just kind of takes, frankly, a bit of seriousness and a data and evidence base to qualify and quantify why music matters. Mm-hmm. And that's what we'll be delivering for the city. And we, we're pretty optimistic that that the city, and I don't just mean the city council or someone working at the city, I mean the city in the most general sense of the word, sees the we'll see the numbers and realize how economically important music is, as much as it is historically or culturally important.
Mm-hmm. Memphis, of course, has songwriters, and Stax had some great ones who all these years later we're now hearing more about on a wider basis as a result of this massive box set of a bunch of Stax demos. Do cities that are able to cultivate songwriting specifically and make that a developed subset of the local scene, do they tend to fare better with the kind of goals that you're talking about? But because you started out by saying not every job in this is as a performer, is as someone who is the front man out there on stage, touring the world.
Yeah, obviously. So the more, when it's songwriters or composers, it's called mailbox money, right? It's money that just arrives in your mailbox, and you, the copyright is yours or your estates for 70 years after you die. So there, if you have an economy focused on songwriting and the business of songwriting, which is not just writing the songs, it's making the songs, which requires a number of other skills, as you know. Over time, success builds long-term revenue. So, songwriters have pensions if their songs are listened to, because the song is a pension if they retain and own the rights. But and every community focuses on on a couple particular things. So Memphis can't be everything. No community can be everything. I think that Memphis, I've been very lucky to have traveled to Memphis a bunch of times. I love Memphis. I think hip hop right now, and the business of hip hop, which starts from songwriting straight through to brands and marketing and fashion and all the other things that emanate from hip hop, I think that's a huge opportunity. And I think if we broke down those component parts into a supply chain, and then we looked at what each of those elements of the supply chain needed, education, investment, and not funding. I don't like that word. It's investment. And business services and so on. I think that we would see an economy that could be incredibly lucrative for the future of the city, and especially in an equitable way.
Right. So in places that are not organized to this degree, what do you see happening with that? Does someone make it big, and then you have kind of a secondhand passing on of information of what the formula is, and it might or might not be the way that it should be done?
Yeah, well, most cities unfortunately still do not have music strategies. It's there's probably 75 cities in the U.S. that have it, maybe 400 or 500 worldwide. So, but there's 4,000 cities, over 100,000 people, over 4,000 cities. So it's a lot of cities in the world. Usually what happens is, we get policy-based evidence making rather than evidence-based policy making. So we have investments made based on what someone likes, or history, or focusing on one particular initiative, whether it's a venue or a festival. Again, not that there's anything wrong with that. I love both of them, but having a more holistic approach that takes into account kind of everything in the music ecosystem, from health and well-being, because that's a real lucrative opportunity, music and health, music therapy, education, obviously the traditional industry stuff, that when cities do not have a greater understanding of their music economies and ecologies, decisions tend to be made that are inadvertently and sometimes, unfortunately, advertently discriminatory, because they focus on one particular thing in one particular way because that's what they know. And we said, well, we we think that there's a better way to do this, but it takes understanding in a, agnostic way, because this is not about politics. This is not about any particular genre. It's just, when I say the word music, it's whatever you want it to mean, is what I always say, right? It's having that understanding means you can make the right decisions. Doesn't mean you're going to make everybody happy. Doesn't mean you're going to solve everybody's problems, because you're not, music is part of a city. So a city's challenges are music's challenges, but it does mean that we can make, better, more articulate, more justifiable decisions. And cities that do not do this tend to not make those kinds of decisions, or do, and they don't tend to work out, because whether it's a policy change or a political change, or sometimes a singular investment, then makes it a lot clearer about what is not being invested in.
Right. And we had an example of that, and it's kind of the reason that there is some hesitancy, I think, among people who are in music to see government get involved in this, because in the 80s, the city government of the time promoted the return of Chips Moman to the city in a studio that ultimately didn't work out. And it raised questions about whether the city, by reaching in at that level, what was giving him a leg up on existing studios here. So does government have to be careful about where it weighs into for a business that a sector that's already here?
Yeah, okay. So that's obviously that's an example of one individual or one company being supported by government for a particular reason. And that happens in every industry, obviously, right? So the government, this is going to be independently collected data. The government is supporting this initiative in complete partnership with the private sector. And that was the only way we were going to get this off the ground in Memphis. We had learned that over trying to get this off the ground for several years. So we are producing the data independently, completely independently, and impartially. And we will present the Memphis City Council and other organizations with the data and the evidence. And we can't control what is going to happen with that data and evidence, but we're cautiously optimistic that it will demonstrate that working together, that investing in music, that taking a kind of agnostic, for lack of a better word, approach, so not prioritizing one thing over another, but ensuring that each subsect is given, the resources they need to thrive. So again, I'm saying hip hop is a great opportunity for Memphis, but it's not the only opportunity. And I'm not saying we should invest in one genre at the expense of others. I'm saying we need to understand what each needs, and we need to build evidence. And then we can say, okay, well, maybe now we do this, and maybe later we do that. And so the council will have a suite of data and evidence. And we've done this all over the United States. So for your readers or your listeners, most of our work is available publicly because it was paid for by a city or by a public entity, whether you go on our website or not. And obviously, and you can see the data that is collected. And in many places, the decisions that are then taken from that data.
Right. And you're working with music export here, right?
Elizabeth K. Wine is an old friend of mine. Conflict of interest. She actually worked for Sound Diplomacy for a period of time and helped when we were very, very. So I'm British and Canadian. I'm not American. We are a British company originally. When we started to come into the United States, we didn't know anyone or anything and made all sorts of mistakes. Elizabeth really helped me make less mistakes. It's so Memphis is near and dear to my heart for many reasons, including that. But we are working with her, and really, frankly, if we don't get the input of artists and practitioners, which it's not just her, there's lots of other people that we're working with, then the data is going to be incomplete. We are not here to tell anybody what to do. It's traditional consulting speak, but it's true. We're not here to tell anybody what to do. We're just here to produce what we believe is an irrefutable evidence base so that decisions can be taken for the benefit of as many people as possible.
And I'm sure you've talked to musicians, people who work in this day in and day out on many different levels, who talk about kind of the unique experience of doing music for a living, who in many cases might not have had health insurance until they were like 45 or 50 years old because they've been out there working. That they're not able to buy a home, things like that. So as part of this, should there be some kind of attempt to really get down to that level where you coordinate for something like standards among clubs and other venues on conditions, maybe a minimum wage for a gig, those types of things?
Yeah, so we have worked on our on fair pay scales. We've done a few of those. Again, it's based on the community A agreeing, and B there's an audience to pay to attend these gigs so they can be paid. We do quite a lot of work around around the regulation to support music venues, recording studios, to protect them in planning law and things like that. Most of the recommendations will be kind of won't be geared towards any particular individual, obviously, or any particular musician. They're more structural. And that's one of the things about this kind of work. And I have to be honest about it. It takes time. This is we're really trying to have a mid to long term holistic change in how we treat music. And that is sometimes antithetical to the more immediate short term frameworks of the music industry, because I understand that, so but yes, we work everywhere we go. We work with musicians in every place. Every single place we've ever worked, we've had local advocates bring us in, because why else would we be brought in? And Memphis is the same. It's Memphians who are making this decision, not us. We're just lucky and gracious that we've been appointed the partners to do it. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting one. I'm very, very excited. We've worked in New Orleans. We've done a big project in New Orleans. We did this similar piece of work. For example, New Orleans is not Memphis. Memphis is not New Orleans, but I do believe that there's a lot of lessons that we can take from both cities to learn from each other.
Sure. And you've also done this work in London. You've done it in Austin. You've done it in Zurich. You've even done it in Melbourne, Australia. Is that right?
We've done different. So we haven't done this specific work in Austin, for example. We've done other bits of work in Austin. But we've worked in New York, in San Francisco, Toronto, Vancouver, London, Berlin, Barcelona, yes, Melbourne, Brisbane, as well as Huntsville, Alabama. We've done a ton of work there. We've worked in Muscle Shoals. We've worked in Northwest Arkansas, Fort Worth, Texas, quite a few other places. We've done this before. Yeah.
And you've been in places that have a musical heritage, a musical story like we have here in Memphis. And part of what I see and what I hear from some musicians who are working now, who are working in the contemporary scene, is kind of a feeling that a musical heritage that includes Stax and Son, that it can somehow be a barrier to having the things happen in the music industry now that you're talking about, and the sound diplomacy is working toward, because people tend to say, well, Stax and Son made it and they didn't have any master plan, really. Although there was a master plan in Sam Phillips' head, there was a master plan in Jim Stewart's head in the case of Son and Stax. So it is kind of this kind of musical heritage. Can it be daunting to trying to make something happen bigger citywide?
No. Al Bell kindly gave me a quote from my book, and he told me, if what we did existed back then, it probably would have made his life easier. But saying that, Memphis in his time was very different to Memphis today, and I'm a white Canadian guy, so I don't think I have the perspective to discuss that. But like, I do. We don't really. I'll just to be frank, we don't really put any difference on whether a city has a defined musical heritage or not. It's just an asset that the city has. Sometimes communities rely on them more than they need to. So we are here to honor Stax and Sun and everything else, but the work is about collecting data about what's happening now, and celebrating it and identifying what can be improved to better support it. So it doesn't really matter. We've worked in Muscle Shoals. Obviously, working with Muscle Shoals Sound and Fame was a key part of the work. But it wasn't any different to working in Huntsville, Alabama, which has musical heritage and history, but doesn't have Sun and Stax and Fame and Muscle Shoals. So this is from a pure kind of the way we do the work. It doesn't really matter in that sense.
Right. And to be fair, when Stax and Sun were happening here, people didn't know people here didn't realize it was as big and as impactful as it was. I mean, it took some time to catch up.
Yeah, well, again, I think sometimes people look at our work and think that the government is going to create something and it's going to be, the next thing. That's not the case at all. Sometimes the best thing that the government can do is get out of the way. But for the government to get out of the way, it's like if you do things right, people won't be sure you've done anything at all. And getting out of the way requires policy to state how to get out of the way. It's not, and we are well aware that sometimes the answer is a lighter touch approach, but you have to be even more sensitive to a lighter touch approach. And the nuance of this can get quite complex, whether it's heavy on government involvement or light on government involvement. That's why this work is not political. It really isn't. It's what works for the city from a very kind of, business structured environment. It's not anything about genre or about affiliation or anything like that.
Right. So a final question here. Do you have a timeline, or are you just kind of, is the first part of this really kind of gathering data and getting that all in one place?
Yeah, we're just, it is. It's going to take a while. The process of this takes at least a year in a city like Memphis. Memphis is big and complicated in the best possible way, I would say, when it comes to music. We are just in the paperwork process right now, to be honest. So we're hoping to start as soon as possible, which I guess will be in the next month or two at the latest. Because it's been announced to the media and everything, then I'm certainly going to be asked questions at my book launch on the 2nd. But once this is properly coordinated, it will be properly announced.
All right.
Okay. Great.
All right. We've been talking with Shane Shapiro, the founder of Sound Diplomacy and the author of the new book, This Must Be the Place, How Music Can Make Your City Better. He will be in town at Crosstown Concourse come, what's the date? October 2nd. Right. He'll be there for then to sign the books and to talk about Sound Diplomacy's work. That will be at the Green Room at Crosstown Arts. I'm Bill Dries, and this has been On the Record.